So getting back to how Mouse ruined comics.
Okay.
All right, 30 seconds. Your 30 seconds are up. No more boomer music.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is another Wednesday. It is another episode of the Mattriarchy, and we are here today to talk about everybody's favorite comic, Kurt Busiek's Marvels.
Oh, I thought we were reading Marvel.
I thought you said Darkwing Duck's greatest hits.
It's going to be another banger of a show, guys.
Yeah.
I have not read Marvel. I it sounds horrible.
It is.
I don't know
it's
that
just
it is.
the kind of thing you want on this
that.
stream.
I have not read this comic.
Oh. You've had some stuff
created...
going on. Yeah.
Oh, this comic. I thought you meant Marvel.
Yeah. So maybe if since you haven't read the book here, Metal, maybe I should move you down to this corner over here.
Oh,
you can put me wherever you want.
Is that the motion?
He put you in the corner.
The stacks.
It's just
I shouldn't be.
I don't know. I'm not trying to be a dick here or nothing, but maybe I'm doomed.
That's weird.
Maybe I have to be that way.
You've been sent to the corner.
Listen, he knows I have the ability to move myself around if I really want to.
So, I gotta say though, before we get started talking about Marvels, and I've got my paper copy right there with the early 2000s branding on it. Actually, I don't even know if the current version. Well, the current version they're only selling is the 25th anniversary, I think now, which has got extra stuff in it.
There's the real one I think that I would like to get someday. There's the annotated version, which has full like page by page annotations. So I think the 25th anniversary version is nice. I think it's the remaster or something, which at least on Kindle, I'm glad that it was free because the remaster, some of the pages in the remaster are low res, which was kind of a disappointment.
Really?
So it was rare, but there'd be once in a while. I was reading it on Comixology on my Kindle, and there would be once in a while a page that would just get a little blurry, and I'm like, this is clearly not fully remastered. If there's like one or two pages, it was not a huge amount of blur, but it was just enough so that you'd be like, something screwy about that page.
Well, on this, this is like the 2001 edition, and I'm not sure which printing it is, but that's when this version was copywritten, and this has slight annotations on one page. It's got the 4 books of the main series.
That's what I've got. Yeah, I've got that too. But the full annotation one is like it's extensive. It's like page by page.
I found a copy of, and I found a copy of the epilogue, and it has a bunch of those kind of things in the epilogue. So I imagine the well received of the epilogue spurred them on to do the fully annotated version. Decided there was a market for that after all. So, and I don't know how I didn't know this, but I guess they had a full year of stuff that came out with the 25th anniversary of it. They just kept releasing new additional information to it and had 2 or 3 printings, and I was just like in different like changes and shaking up things, and it was all kinds of stuff. I was like, huh, that's crazy. So. But yeah, it was a what do you call it? A touchstone in modern comics, I suppose, in some ways.
It's won a plethora of awards. I believe it's won an Eisner, Harvey, won a bunch. Scott McCloud cracks a joke about the amount of accolades that Understanding Comics got, and then he basically says that Busiek basically got pretty much the same amount of awards. And I think he alludes to the fact, I think Marvel's, because Understanding Comics has done well financially, but Marvel's was apparently a financial hit as well. So it was it was one of that perfect storm of critical and commercial success.
Right. I read it. I think it was, you may be referring to the same thing I was thinking of, but Busiek and McCloud, grew up together or knew each other at college or something. And I was reading. I can't remember where it was. But McLeod had said that they had an agreement that Marvel's would that Busiek wanted to do superhero comics, and McLeod wanted to expound on the academic side of it, and said, "Well, you can have all the big brain awards, and I'll take all the superheroes." And Busiek gets both of them. And McLeod's like, "Well, I guess he had it coming. He earned it." So
actually, he said he was joking. He's like, "You cheated."
Yeah. We had a deal.
Right. I was supposed to get all of the literary accolades.
Yeah. Well, and so part of what we wanted to talk about today is, do we feel that was valid? I mean, honestly, how does Marvel's hold up? And I'll tell you a little bit about why I came up with this question specifically. Earlier this year, I was working on a project that I haven't finished yet, but I read Gotham Knights and Marvel's back to back, and both of them by Gotham Knights by John Ostrander, the first miniseries, and then Marvel's. And I wanted to compare the way it portrays non-superheroes in a superhero world. And so I I was struck in Marvel's by the difference in the two writers' approaches to their world's heroes. Not in a way where either of them seemed like, oh, these don't seem like a real, it doesn't seem real enough to meet its goal. I thought both of them were fine pieces as far as that goes, but definitely some of the attitudes toward heroes and for what that meant was just really different. And I wanted to talk over it with some guys about what their thought in going back and reviewing it after, because I think all of us except the metal had read or been exposed to the concept of Marvels before. I'm not sure, Cartoonicus, if you have any history with Marvels.
No, I have never read it until now.
Okay, until now. Well, I don't know why you're here. No,
yeah, I'm familiar with the concept. I've just never.
I mean, he's read it. He's read it now, so it's all good.
He's read it. There
we go. It doesn't matter when you read it, as long as you read it.
Yeah.
I read it at some point in the past.
This is one of the books personally for me. This might be a rough stream for me because I try not to fanboy too hard often. I do fanboy a little over Busiek and Marvel's because to me this is I have only like positive things to say. Like I don't think I can come up with a negative point for what it's trying to be. I think this is perfect. And I think that Busiek is able to do what so many people try to do, which is to be literary and intelligent and philosophical and just kind of ruminate. People want to think and reflect. He's able to be so reflective, and but at the end of the day, still have such a positivity towards the subject material. Mm-hmm. And if it is such a rare breath of fresh air, because in most, I wouldn't say all, but there is definitely a trend in literary works to be negative. Mm-hmm. The minute that you go, well, I'm going to be reflective and philosophical about this, my eyes roll into the back of my head because I'm like, well, here comes the cynicism, and a lot of this comes from the British invasion, and because they were often coming at superheroes from an outsider lens and looking at these toys that the Americans had made, and they would often look down at them. And I think part of that is a very British thing to do with just America in general, which is to always look at American literary achievement and go, well, we did it first, so everything you've done, we can take credit for.
They're still just mad about the tea.
Right. But what's interesting is that when it comes to film and comics, the Brits started copying our homework.
Oh, yeah. From the very beginning.
Yeah, as opposed to us copying their homework through a lot of literature, this was a place where those roles were reversed. That being said, a lot of Brits would come in and just when you have people like Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, Warren Ellis, and a host of others, when they come to superheroes, you often get the sense that they're looking down and often looking down their noses at the material. And Busiek is such a breath of fresh air because at the end of the day, he's looking up. I don't know. I just something about it.
Well,
He's had. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I wasn't. I thought you were finished.
Well, I was just gonna say the final thing is I'll say that Busiek may have had one of the most profound impacts on my writing. Omega Girl has such a huge debt to Astro City. So that's my final bit. I'm done.
Yeah. No. And actually, that's something Barry and I were talking about before the stream started. I had a very similar experience on it. I don't want to get into, but the one thing I want to say in response to your thing specifically is my one complaint, especially with the original miniseries, 0 through 4, chapter 4, where I really felt like and not the work as a whole, but the way he ended it, it really felt like he veered into that cynicism and hard, and it left with the end of chapter 4, it left me feeling utterly deflated, and I think there are reasons for that I don't necessarily want to get into right yet, but
sure.
It was, but one big part of the reason that left me feeling that way is it's his work is never, I don't believe in any way in the first 4 books is aspirational, but especially through the middle of the 3rd book, it is in awe. There's a sense of awe about it that I think is a transcendent thing, right? It's watching the World Series, it's seeing the film of him step on the moon. It's that kind of just stunning portrayal of the human experience that I think
oh good, sorry,
that I think goes into that. But it just, I feel like just the way it ended just left, and we could talk about that more as we.
I was gonna say, I think you and I interpret the ending very differently.
It's possible. And I think there's a specific reason for why that is as well. But the other thing is when we talk about the epilogue, because I had not read that before today, and man, I gotta say, I was in tears for 2/3 of that thing.
Because I bet it recontextualized it for you. I feel
it takes so many of those things, and we can get into the details. Sure. Anybody who's watching this is like, what? We get into the details a little bit, but it spins it around in a way, and it's great. I really appreciated that. It doesn't necessarily change how I feel about the end of 4, but it does change how I feel about the way the end of 4 impacts the rest of the story.
I think you and I interpret the epilogue differently too. This will be a good discussion.
Could be.
I actually feel worse about the epilogue than I do the ending.
Really?
I do.
Okay.
But it's complicated, and we'll get into it. It'll be good.
Yeah, definitely. So, a little bit of my thing. You were talking about how much you feel like Busiek's work has influenced Astro City. One of the things that I realized in reading the 2 pieces that I had picked, this and in Gotham Knights, is how much our world building in Ideal Comics world had been affected by that, a ground level up perspective. How much we wanted to look at superpowers and politics and comedy and drama, all had their play within this very lived-in world that both Ostrander and Busiek write about. And so I told Barry before the show started, in reading these back to back, I felt like I was reading a how-to manual of world building for Ideal Comics. And so that's also part of why when we got to the end of 4, which we'll probably talk about that, why it hit me the way it did some ways. Also because I think that Busiek has a specific view of the place of a civilian in a society that is different than how that one particular thing is different than how I look at it. But in any case, it was that. So those kind of in I came to Marvel's after I had already discovered the writing of Roy Thomas in All-Star Squadron, and how Roy Thomas had gone back through an All-Star Squadron and had mapped out a history of the DC universe from all of the different releases. And so there'd be little footnotes on the bottom about how, he took these unrelated events and made them background to his story, right? So it already had that kind of framework in it. So when I tucked into Marvel's, 19-year-old Reese is tucking into Marvel's, and it has the same kind of approach, I was like, like walking in somebody else's footsteps in the snow. I felt like I already kind of had a feel for all of that, and to see how that big world played out. And it wasn't until probably 5 years later that I had gone in and read about the story of when they did that first Human Torch Namor battle, right? Those big comics and the sessions to get those to happen back in, what was it, 41 or whatever. And man, that was really interesting to see how that plays out in this, and how other events that they wove together. It was as a history nerd, I really liked the approach with Marvel's. So
it was 39.
It
was 1939.
I was gonna say it's
okay.
early. It's like right on the heels of a super action comics.
Yeah. So Cartoonicus, this is the first time you've read Marvel's. What are your thoughts?
Well, I actually had a tough experience trying to read this, mainly because from the moment I opened the first page, it was just a tsunami of narration. I mean, my gosh, and even the dialogue too would fill every page.
You need to read more. I was gonna say you need to read. I'm spoiled. I think you might be spoiled on certain writers because like Alan Moore actually doubles text.
Yeah, I really don't care much for narration, and when it's everywhere, when it basically is telling the story, it is hard to follow along. And here I was with limited time on my hands, trying to get this done before the stream, right? And eventually, I just had to get to kind of skimming over each page and getting the gist of what was happening, which actually worked out quite well because the entire thing is like this one big history of Marvel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they would just take it one chapter at a time. And so I was like, okay, I get it. We're in the such and such era. We're in the such, and so like every 5 pages it was, hey, remember this character? Hey, remember that character? And on that, I don't know, is it a great story per se? It was hard to, really get invested because of that. But it was an interesting, walk down memory lane, I guess.
I could not disagree with you more. Oh my gosh.
I'm just saying it was hard.
Me.
It was hard for me to, wrap my mind about everything.
So there is one thing. There's one caveat I need to throw in. And so for people who are not familiar with it, it might be good to kind of set the groundwork here. This is a very different book, and I think that does throw people who are new to it. And because it is and this is one of the few. I don't know if I'd call it a criticism, but it is something important to say, and it's a very important distinction. And it's something that may sound very subtle when I first say it, but it is the most crucial thing you can say when it comes to approaching Marvels. And it's this: there's a difference between the Thing and something that's about the Thing. Mm-hmm. So in this case, there's a difference between, I'll try to flesh this out a little bit more so it's less confusing, but there's a difference between superhero stories, just like there's, and stories that are about superhero stories, just like there is a difference between stories that are fantasies and stories that are about fantasy. And that's basically the separation between a story that has a sort of meta level to it. And meta does not necessarily mean that you have a character who's like just like Deadpool talking to the camera. Meta simply means that there's like this extra layer and it creates an additional distance so that you can get another layer of a reading or an interpretation or a viewpoint on what you're actually seeing. And so in many superhero stories, what we get is simply superhero stories. And superhero stories have certain formulas, they have certain characters, they have certain situations, and they're made for to accomplish a specific impact, typically a power fantasy escapism. What Marvel's is doing, and that's all well and good. What Marvel's is doing is Marvel's is creating a little bit of distance between that and is saying, okay, let's look at superheroes through a deliberate, constructed, and limited lens. And that deliberate lens that Busiek is choosing to put on, and it's no mistake that it's a limited lens. It's not a coincidence that the main character goes through most of the story with one eye. His vision is impaired. That is a deliberate. And the point is that by providing a limited lens as opposed to an omniscient one, by providing a limited lens, in this case, it's the lens of essentially a bystander, an informed bystander, but a bystander to what these stories would be like if you were in fact there, as opposed to that omniscient. Well, the point is that by doing that, by making that deliberate choice, you will be able to, ironically, you will be able to see things that you would not have been able to see if you'd in fact had both eyes open.
It's the story behind the story, and I get that, and that is a cool idea. Unfortunately, the result was that I felt like you could just have done a documentary of the history of Marvel, and it still would have been the same thing.
Complete disagree. No, because
I haven't even read this, and because Twitless is speaking my language, I understand what he's saying, and I probably agree with him on this.
So the thing, and I'll tell you why. Because the documentary only tells you how these stories were created. The point of Marvel's is to
different.
Yeah,
but that's not true. The documentary tells you everything about the people who created it, so it's still giving you the behind the scenes.
No, but that's not Marvel's. Is not supposed. Marvel's is not behind the scenes.
Right,
it's behind the police tape.
But it's a similar.
No, it's completely different. And it may be a bordering a neighbor experience, but the point of Marvel's is to say, what is it like to look upwards,
absolutely,
and at the actual superhero while he is doing what he's doing. And it's the type of thing that Busiek does to perfection in Astro City. However, and this is an important thing to say, there is a certain point. I've noticed this about Busiek's work. It's one of the few things I could critique about it, even though I love what he does. But after you read a lot of Marvel's and Busiek's writing, I mentioned before that his approach is to create a certain distance. Well, that distance means that you don't feel as connected to the characters that he's talking about. If we feel a connection to anyone in Marvel's, it's to Phil Sheldon.
And that maybe was my problem, though, is that because it's such a slog to get through, and although that constant narration, I feel like Sheldon might as well just be the narrator of a documentary talking about.
No, because we get wrapped up so much in his life that I was attached to Sheldon at the end, and that made it a little bit of a problem in terms of, wow, I'm normally used to being attached to Captain America, but the point of Marvel's is to get attached to Phil and his viewpoint on things, and that works 110% in my opinion.
Well, and part of the thing too is is that.
And again, it maybe have been because I was having to rush through the thing.
Right. Well, and I think part of the phrasing, which is like unfortunate that you had to rush through it, because like even the way that the Busiek uses words is he's writing in that same register as like a 1940s newspaperman, right? It's like it's like watching an old Bela Lugosi film and skipping the intro card. It's like, like fast forwarding through the crawl in a Star Wars picture. Like it actually sets up the tone and the what I'm trying to think of.
Yeah, but see, I always skip the crawl.
Yeah.
Like I can get everything that the crawl gives me in the first 5 minutes.
I'm going.
You actually can't. if
Oh god.
if you skip the crawl in a Star Wars movie, you actually have
Yeah,
no
you-
idea what's happening.
You
I
don't
did.
know what you're missing because you think you got it, but there was literally stuff that wasn't in the beginning of the movie there.
Give me a
Yeah.
second. I need to take Cartoonicus out back behind the woodshed. Okay, I'm kidding.
We don't
look
have
at
a
the flowers.
woodshed.
I
Look at
know.
the flowers.
My point is, if this had really wanted to focus on the character, get rid of the narration. Let me see a day in this guy's life. Let me
We do-
watch
oh,
him.
We do.
Hey,
Dozens
let
of
me
days
watch.
in this guy's life.
Let me watch him jump behind a car to avoid an explosion.
We do.
Right,
That
I do.
happens.
A lot of that
That
happens.
happens. All right. We're gonna have to chalk this up that you read this too fast. I'm just gonna have to.
Yeah,
Because
you know what's one of my favorite things
Maybe,
about
but
comics?
I see that. Remember, I only
Reading them?
started reading them.
Well, yeah, but
quickly.
like like when you open up a comic that you've never read before, like you're not familiar with the series at all, but you're like hopping in on issue number 7, and then you just open it up, and right there, boom, landing page. It tells you everything you need to know about the character before this point. So you're like, cool, I get it. I can read this and jump right into the story.
here's literally Phil Sheldon, and he's on the street taking a picture, like basically dodging the things happening on the street. Like it's literally what you're talking about.
Where I
to
see
Fizz-
people
to
looking
Fizz-
up in the sky.
It's literally
Hey, look at
Phil with the
bird,
camera.
plane.
Well, and I will say this: there is one thing that can be commented. Alex Ross, and I want to get to Barry in a second because we haven't had him chime in yet.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm listening. It's fine.
But one thing about is that it's complaint that I don't know that I noticed so much, and it's not Marvel's is better, I think, than Kingdom Come about this, but there is a staticness to Ross's painting style that looks, because it's not only because it's photorealistic, but because it lacks some of the because painting lacks of the techniques of that ink work allows. So you don't get emanata, you don't get so much with motion lines and blur. You can get some of that, but not as well.
Well, yeah,
And
even
so-
looking at this page,
But for-
because I love this art,
Yeah.
But-
a lot of that is made up for with the panel design, like the
yes.
orientation and
So
everything.
here,
like that.
here's
Yeah.
here's the thing.
I agree.
Here's the,
I agree
Good
100%.
layout.
here's the thing. So in Kingdom Come, I actually I give a little more credence to that criticism. Here, I do not.
Well, yeah,
In
I would
thi-
agree. This is his. It's much better here than in Kingdom Come.
Because of the subject matter. Because the subject matter is a type of like it's a memoir. It's an old man giving his memoir of it. The
Right,
the static aspect to it is completely acceptable, and in fact enhances what's going on. So the
Yeah.
pairing of Busiek and Alex Ross is a marriage made in heaven for this project.
Yeah,
I don't have a problem at all
And
with
it's
the art
the dude's a
style.
photojournalist, so it perfectly makes sense.
It is so like perfect for this project. Like I can understand where people maybe bring in criticism of Alex Ross for other superhero projects. For this one, I have no
yeah,
criticism.
I totally agree. I do not have a problem with the artwork. I love period pieces, and so I tend to appreciate some of the the retro feel of stuff, particularly back in like the 40s and the earlier chapters, and then again in the 60s here when they were seeing other things. That's all fine.
Fizz had a point. Fizz had a point here. He said, "Name something else that's about superheroes." And Planetary by Warren Ellis comes to mind, but I hate it. So
Well, and
Oh,
I
you
think
already
there-
made me hate it by saying Warren Ellis.
One thing that
Yeah,
struck
it's
me
true.
early on was when Namor was fighting the Human Torch, and then they showed Captain America, and they started getting into like World War II, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, wait a minute," because I didn't know what the whole comic was about yet. This was the comic I've been wanting forever, and that would be a story taking centering around Captain America and his gang of buddies in World War II, utilizing as many old Marvel characters as you can get in there, like Wolverine, Namor,
yeah, you want to go
Nick
look
Fury, Howard Stark, all those, right?
so you're going to want to go look for Roy Thomas's project, The Invaders.
Oh,
So where he does that, he does the same. He gave the All-Star Squadron treatment to the Marvel heroes, and where he basically goes through the Marvel timeline and pieces together. Some of them makes full stories out of crossover covers and all kinds of stuff, and also uses some of the All Winners squad, which the All Winter Squad were the stars of All Winners Comics. That was a minor Marvel property post-war. So
Oh, it looks like he's doing so in like the older 60s, 70s style of drawing.
yeah.
So
Well,
one thing to point out,
the last part, the last double page spread or whatever it is in chapter 1 references the young allies / young all winter squad / invaders thing.
Yeah, invaders.
I actually don't like
so
that.
one thing to point out, one thing to point out about the art before we get too far that I think is really important to point out is that Busiek had brought an encyclopedic like knowledge apparently of old comic book issues to this project, which is why so many of the a lot of reading Marvels is not just character based. It is literally these were events that happened in that shared universe. And so the first time Galactus touches down, a lot of these moments, they're either ripped straight from the comics, or they're, very closely tied into those things. Several important moments for the New York of Marvel, such as, like I said, the Galactus attack, and the death of Gwen Stacy, of course, at the very end. But a lot of the historical things that went into the set piece was Alex Ross. And Alex Ross actually kind of says that, Kurt brought the comic book knowledge there, but I was the one who went and had to do all of the research into what would be in the storefront.
Right.
And apparently his mother, I think Ross's mother was worked in the fashion industry at the time. And so he directly pulled from reference from her.
Oh,
and
that's great. I was wondering about that.
So it makes the world feel so authentic. And it's something that in the follow-up pieces that they do in the, because Marvel took Marvels, right, and said, this is a big success. How can we spin this off 100 times?
Mm-hmm.
And so in the follow-up works, it's just not as magical because it doesn't, A, it doesn't have Kurt Busiek's writing, but B, not having Alex Ross's, because he apparently spent a lot of time researching, because it takes a lot of time to research a set piece.
Well, that intimate care and thought, you can't just recreate. Unless you have a whole other team of people doing the same thing, thinking the same thing, and being right there with Ross and Busiek when they create it. And that's probably not going to happen because Marvel's not going to pay for that double.
Right. So a lot of what you're seeing in the background here, like I said, Ross spent a lot of time researching, how those people would dress and what this would look like. And it pays off. Like I said, the world of Marvels feels so authentic.
There's a panel where he walks by and it's all it says it's a window of the dresses, and it says in the window styles based off of Wasp and stuff.
Yeah.
If I may, the one thing I did think of, I'm not going to say that it was a bad thing that they didn't do this, but I thought it could have been cool, is if as they go through each time period, instead of having one artist for the whole thing, you utilize similar art style for each time, so that in the 1940s you're using a kind of old rustic thing, much like they actually have in there. I thought Red Alex Rux was good for that, but maybe by the time we got to the 1960s, you're using that kind of old style cartooning, and maybe even in the 50s you use the old classic comic book style. Just like really get us into the culture of each of those by utilizing the artwork.
He does a little bit. He does that. There's more sepia tone in the first chapter.
Sure.
So he does do to evoke the golden age a bit in some cases. There's a little more black and white actually being used to kind of evoke the sense of what they would be seeing on television,
at a certain
or
point,
not television, but
you're in the late 1960s. We should be seeing psychedelic, right? Perhaps and I'm not 100% sure how far into the future we are in the end.
70s, I think, right? 70s.
Maybe.
The epilogue,
the girls look like they were wearing hoodies.
The epilogue, so Death of Gun Stacy is in the 70s, I believe, because the whole point is that it's basically 30s / 40s, 50s, 60s, and it basically ends in the 70s, and the epilogue basically takes place hardcore in the 80s because it's Chris Claremont.
Well, yeah, it's Chris Claremont, but it's in the 70s. That issue
Okay.
is from the 70s.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Okay. So the night Gwen Stacy died is in July of 23. I mean, of 73.
yeah, because it's basically 70s to maybe 80s ish.
So let's see here.
I just thought it would have been cool to see.
I do know that Marvel's the follow up through the camera lens does hit the 80s because it touches on Secret Wars, specifically. So I believe that's when Sheldon finally passes. He basically his life that we get documented in comics is essentially from the 40s to the 80s, I think.
And I just thought it really would have been cool to really like indulge in very different styles each time.
It's not what Ross is going for,
right? You would want to have
Busiek.
several artists working on it.
Yeah, and it wouldn't work for this project and what they're going for. But it would be interesting for maybe someone else to try. Yeah, here's another huge, capstone moment for the Marvel universe, the marriage of Reed and Sue. So you guys, like I said, this is the type of project where you can often look at the artwork and say it's for you or not for you in many ways. However, I do need to point something out that I absolutely adore about what Busiek is doing here. Right now at this particular moment, and this is something, try to say this succinctly as possible. One of the things I love about Busiek's writing is his sense of complexity. And by complexity, I mean that he shows both the positive and negative implications and facets to a particular element. And so the thing about Busiek's work that I think some people may critique is that he's not comfortable letting you get too comfortable. However, the wonderful thing about Busiek is the fact that he's going to provide both sides, the positive and the negative. So you'll notice on the left-hand side, what you're seeing is Cyclops, essentially. And we have a dark blue on the left. We have this brighter colors on the right. What's happening is essentially the mutants and all of the bigotry that's expressed towards the mutants is being alluded to on the left. And on the right, we see the marriage of Reed and Sue. What's awesome about what's going on in the story, at the narrative at the time, is that Sheldon is kind of, very subtly contemplating the fact that the world is so wrapped up in the celebrity and the sort of shallow hero worship of the marriage that they're not seeing all of the negative stuff that's happening in the background. However, Busiek is not simply saying, oh, marriage on the right bad because society have a bad thing happening. Good thing can't be good because also bad thing happening in society. That is a childish way that many other writers will approach these types of situations. They'll say, oh, the image on the right has no meaning because the image on the left exists. What Busiek does is Busiek does not tell you what you're supposed to feel. Instead, what Busiek does is he lets you kind of figure it out yourself. And he basically says both are happening. Yep. The bigotry is happening and the marriage is happening at the same time. And that leaves you feeling with mixed emotions and mixed feelings. And it's that mix that Busiek wants you to be at. That's where he wants you to be. He wants you to be in that mixture. And that's a very literary position. But
yeah. No.
So quick note, I did check it in. I'll look it up. The Christmas tree episode was 75 or 76. Okay. And that's actually from an interview with Busiek and what's his name?
Frost.
What? Frost. Thank you. Why do I always forget his name? Second of all, hilarious comment there from Seven. The characters and costumes at the wedding look ridiculous. I get the secret disguise, but do they have no sense of decorum? And June Tumner responds, do they not have formal superhero costumes to wear for a wedding?
Okay.
I was going to say, is anybody
that would
laughing
amazing.
at the fact that Tony's
they're Romanian.
The only problem here is that they're wearing their masks and helmets, right? Like, let's say this wasn't public, right? But if this was a private wedding, it would make sense even then for them to still wear their outfits aside from the masks and helmets. because often military personnel and police force and stuff wear their uniforms to wedding.
Okay, so
but they don't wear their hats.
I got to interject here because all that being the case, let me pull up another image here. Well, part of what what Marvel's is doing is it's basically it's a history exploration. And so most of the time when they pull these moments, they're pulling directly from the comics upon which they're based. And if you go into the wedding of Reed and Sue, everybody's wearing their superhero outfits. So it's consistent.
Well, this is also a public wedding though, so I also don't have a problem with them wearing their masks.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go out in green long johns on the daily, you might as well show up to a wedding that way.
It is consistent with what happens.
Jim Cooner does nitpick. They wear dress uniforms to formal events, not everyday khakis, which is true.
So I have a question.
So there, I guess Jim, then when it comes time to have a superhero formal attire, we'll just have to get you on the line and have help us design those, perhaps.
Well, this is also something that you guys were talking about earlier. Is they use Ross recreates these images at a different angle, at a different scene. It's the same images borrowed from the old comics, those exact old comics.
Like I believe he literally has the moment in the image I just showed where Thing is blowing his nose.
Yeah, it's right there.
So he's put the camera in a slightly different position, but it's supposed to be essentially, I believe, the same moment.
Yeah. It's like somebody else's photograph book.
I thought I was seeing an old-fashioned Nick Fury in there.
Well, and they've also got, and this is another thing on the pro costume. It's a wedding where they were just fighting supervillains about 5 minutes before the wedding. So
yeah, she was kidnapped.
Now, to Seven's point, and this is something I will point out, and it is another point of complexity, which is Alex Ross. Again, I think he's perfect for this project, but the flip side of Alex Ross's the choice of Alex Ross. When you choose Alex Ross, that comes with consequences. And one of the consequences with choosing Alex Ross is that, because we were talking about static stuff earlier, the other consequence is because he's drawing such a Norman Rockwell sense of realism, Norman Rockwell realism makes superheroes look a little awkward. Yep. And that's just the way it is. And some people react very poorly when they see a very normal human, not a supermodel, but a very normal. Because Norman Rockwell, Alex Ross tends to not get like supermodels to model his characters on. He gets average. He gets his buddies, his friends to model these people on. And so you're seeing very normal human builds for these characters. So Captain America is not the supermodel body type. He's like a average American who's a little, he's a bit on the buff side. Right. And that makes these characters look less idealistic, less platonic than they normally would. And like I said, that creates a particular bit of dissonance that you kind of have to get over. And
the other thing is they also customize the designs in some ways to reflect real people. Some Marvel editors and those kind of characters. Yeah. And you've got the Professor was based on Roy Hinckley, the guy who played the Professor in Gilligan's Island, who was a scientist in like a ton of science fiction movies in the mid '60s. Yeah. So I think that's probably one of those like. If Alex Ross is doing a fan casting. So
sure. Now, I have a question about comic book history here. At this point in time, did Tony have a secret identity?
Yes. I think
he
so.
Did?
Yes, he did.
Then it makes more sense that he's sitting there in full armor.
Yeah. No, Tony had the secret identity for quite a while.
At that,
what's the 80s when he did the Devil in the Bottle one or whatever? It was around that time period, wasn't it?
Yeah, Demon in a Bottle was cheapers. I think that was in the 80s.
Yeah.
It annoys me, of course, that Sue is the only one in a gown, like just because she's the bride, she's got.
Was that Crystal over there?
Well, no, it's Masters, Alicia Masters.
Oh, okay, yes.
79.
Before that, they got married before Crystal.
Oh, was it 79?
Demons were brought in.
Demon in a Bottle was 79.
Okay, so not quite.
79. fast on the Google there, Metal.
I picked out Nick Fury way in the background there.
Yeah.
And,
Tony had a secret identity up until the movies.
I don't know if it was the movies, but he had it for a long time.
He came out before then. It was after Demon in a Bottle and after Iron Wars.
Okay, so it was
and everything. But it was,
up until Armor Wars, he's still hiring and firing Iron Man. So that whole facade.
That's right.
Well, and then Rhodey takes over being Iron Man, just playing Iron Man for a while
too,
and then being
that's
War
for Secret
Machine.
Wars.
So
that's into the 80s.
So, but I think it's also true that Tony had a secret identity up until the movies because nobody knew who Iron Man was before.
No doubt, right? Those comics weren't.
I kid.
Jim Shooter said that. Jim Shooter literally said when he brought up, he said no one knew who Iron.
Right.
Yeah, he was talking about the toys. He said no one knows who Iron Man is. So like it's the editor-in-chief of Marvel knew that no one knew. Who Iron
don't
Man
forget
was.
the Avengers was created to give the unpopular characters a second shot, right?
Well, no, not quite. Because the Avengers were there. I mean, Justice Society was created for that reason. Justice League kind of became that. But the Avengers were kind of the big dogs at the time. They were like all of Marvel's main heroes except the Fantastic Four.
Well,
and Spider-Man.
To Cartoonicus's point, though, a lot of part of that was true in the sense that a lot of those characters, although they had a little bit of popularity, like a fan base, they couldn't carry a solo book.
I
will say
Ant-Man couldn't carry a solo book. He was paired with
all my friends knew who Iron Man was prior to the movie coming out, even the ones who didn't read comics, and that's because we all watched the Iron Man cartoon when we were kids, which had an amazing opening with him and the hammer. I love the opening to that cartoon.
Yeah. That was a really cool.
For me, it was Iron Man: Automated Adventures.
So, the other thing to point out though, about nobody. At the time Avengers came out had a solo book because Marvel could only publish like 6 or 8 books on the monthly, and because of their contract with DC, who had the distribution at the time. So they doubled up. Part of that was because they couldn't have more titles. So that was a way to get more stories out and also split duties with artists. So that was like nobody carried a whole book back then for Marvel. So even so Amazing Fantasy became Amazing Spider-Man and that kind of stuff happened. But anyhow, moving on. So Barry, we have totally talked past you so far.
Dude, I was completely interjecting my thoughts.
What has been your history of Spider-Man? I mean, not Spider-Man.
Well,
Sorry,
that damn menace.
Fizz mentioned Spider-Man in the chat, and it's the first thing that went into my head before I was done talking.
I don't know much about Spider-Man, but there's a little punk named Peter Parker that still owes me money for finishing his paper for his science report back in the day.
Well, it's funny that you bring up Spider-Man because Spider-Man, also being a photographer, is a key character. Not like a super important one, but every time he shows up, Phil Sheldon has a huge problem with this punk kid who keeps talking. He hates this kid because this kid keeps on bashing Spider-Man. Yeah. He's contributing to Jameson's crusade.
Yeah.
And this is another brilliant Busiek move because Busiek is choosing to use, and it shows. I think the term is called focalization, which has to do with it's a way of interpreting the narrative view we get, and essentially what we have here is we're given an extremely limited narrator, but at the same time, it is completely understood. It is expected, in fact, that the reader is supposed to know something that the narration is not telling you.
I was going to say that.
So in that situation where Peter Parker says, "Hey, Jameson," let me see if I can find it.
One of the great things about it too that I really liked, especially the way they framed the beginning of the story and back in issue 1, was the amount of respect that and the nature of the respect, the specific nature of the respect that Phil had for Jameson from back in the day. And that's one of those things that I thought is really interesting. And so you see the nature of their relationship change as their perspective on the Marvels changes as well. And that's something that I thought that was really well done. But anyway, Barry, I interrupted you and derailed you with a Spider-Man comment.
Well, you did, jerk. But
yeah,
there's this discussion going on, and Jim Turner just commented about it also because we're talking about Hulk and cake, and I love cake, and I like the Hulk. But Turner said, I think because he was trapped by a leader in an extended story. I think that might be true, but couldn't Banner have been there, and they used his link to science and Reed also, just as Banner? I'm not sure.
Well, if he's trapped by the leader, Banner can't get out.
I know. That's it. That's over there. Okay, I'm not.
Yeah. So what was
I found it.
Okay. What was your experience, Barry, in reading Marvels back in the day?
Oh man. Well, I was a big Alex Ross fanboy just because it was Alex Ross. Whoa. We're doing this. I believe that Parker. So Ross, that's the same Parker image. I wonder who the model was, because that's the same character image or style that was from an old, was it 80s or 70s cartoon? They did with Spider-Man and his wonderful super friends. The hairstyle, face structure, everything was just identical. So I wonder who he had to model for that. But
what I love here is this moment, this pregnant pause.
Yeah, the look
where Sheldon's just staring at him. I love that, and it's perfect use of the wordless panel. That stare says it all. What Sheldon is thinking. But right here, what's happening, right in those couple of panels, Peter Parker shows up and says, "Hey, I got some pictures. They make Spidey look terrible," and then you get Sheldon's look there. And so the story, in terms of its normal narration and our point of view with Sheldon, is telling us one thing. But the expectation that Busiek has is that all of his readership is supposed to know that's Spider-Man.
Agreeing on a joke,
right, and that completely. And so the thing is that Sheldon's perspective on Peter is completely inaccurate because he doesn't know what we know. But because he doesn't know what we know, we get to see something entirely different out of this exchange. This is the beauty of right here. This exchange right here encapsulates the genius, in my opinion, of what Marvels is doing, and the reason why Marvels has to exist in what it's doing. Like a documentary would not be able to deliver this particular that's genius moment. And it's not, like I said, it works on several levels because, like I said, he sees. And so Busiek is also signaling to us, right, through this moment. Busiek signals to the reader and says, Sheldon's view, even though it's the point of view, Sheldon's view is not objective truth.
Right.
Sheldon's view, he's missing an eye. He is limited.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that he's bad or that you can't learn from him.
It's just his point of view.
But it's just his point of view, and you can, and that's the point here, and that creates a rich interpretive layer to what's going on here. Normally, as superhero readers, we get full omniscience, and so
Now, on the other hand,
honest. What a dishonest
I didn't realize that was a joke.
I get that. That's good.
I didn't pick it up until you guys were sniggering, and I was like, "Wait a second."
That Peter, he's kind of double crossing.
Sheldon storms out.
He money. Yeah, he does.
He can't. He can't.
It's a great scene. It's a great
he can't take
everything. Yeah. He wants him to punch him. He wants Parker to get socked in the face.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's what I was going to say earlier was that the other side of this is that if you are not an avid comic reader or haven't done your research, if you're some beginner, this book is not necessarily for you because you're not going to have a clue.
That'd be interesting.
What's actually happening here. I suppose it could still function as an introductory to the Marvel Universe because, again, it's kind of like the entire history of it.
We need to
But
find somebody and introduce them to this.
You're still going to miss out on what's actually happening.
It does.
For instance, I know nothing about Nova, so that scene at the end,
and it makes a ton of sense of the Marvel Universe coming out exactly when it did, right? It's like Starman, right? For DC, Starman paints a brilliantly coherent, multi-generational story as long as that story stops in 2001, right? With the DC, I'm serious. If you take the DC universe and extend it out further, like it's the chronal ties that tie that story together pull and stretch and snap, and you don't if it doesn't make sense if it's not fixed in time. And Marvel's is the same way, and coming out when it did, you're looking back at these events and they are in lived memory. So and they are passing out of lived memory right now. So the Marvel timeline is stretched too far for this to have the same chronological feel as it did, and for these events to be happening nearly in real time from a historical lens.
Well, even if we consider that this is going back to much earlier stories.
Yep. Yep, because Phil Sheldon's life is fixed along that timeline, and so his life marks out when that's happening. And so you're sitting in 1996 or whatever, and you're looking back at things that were happening 20 years earlier and before, but it's still, Peter Parker getting married in the 80s still makes sense in the mid 90s. And that, somehow they just didn't have a kid for that long. I mean, people sometimes are childless for a while. And so,
right. But again, that all
I mean, it's still fantasy, but it's still fantasy, but it breaches the gap of fantasy into something like you're like watching,
Yeah, I get what you're saying. The thing is, you're still, again, if you're a newbie, none of that matters. This is all hinging on us knowing our history about things.
All right,
and
I was pretty much a Marvel newbie.
No, let me finish. Okay. Because on that note, we see superhero universes, gosh darn it, get rebooted every 5 to 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like you can easily, retcon as much history as you need just to get back to this and say, okay, here's the first care about.
So this, I will say, Marvel's assumes there are different layers to this, right? If you know all the references he's making, you get a lot more. I don't know all the references he's making. The
Jim's
book,
right.
In order for the book to really work, it assumes, I think, a basic level of Marvel knowledge, like the level of knowledge where you know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, like that basic level, or that I think Tony Stark is Iron Man. So, but if you have that basic, I went to a comic book shop and I relatively know who these characters are. You get everything you need to from Marvel's, and from there you can essentially dig deeper and get more out of it. And maybe on a reread, when you know these stories more, or have the annotated version, you get even more out of it. Like the early stuff with the Human Torch and Namor, if you know more, like at the very beginning, they even reference like Martin Goodman. Like they pull a little bit of real history in terms of Goodman owning Marvel Comics and so on, and being their publisher, and stuff like that. So you get a little more out of it, but you only need, I think, what I would call an introductory level of knowledge that most people who would pick this up probably already have.
But my point is, even if you have a much greater knowledge, you should be able to cut out as much nonsensical history as you need just to get back to the main, what's clearly supposed to be the main feel of the story.
Right. No, I would agree that I would agree that it can be appreciable beyond the late 90s.
I don't really care what happens beyond this point.
Right. I could say that it could be appreciable for a reader reading after the late 90s. I'm just saying that it coming out in the mid to late 90s, when it did, it packed a punch within the fandom because of the recentness and the flow of time for those levels of readers.
Can I just interject and say that I think that there's a cameo or a pre-cameo something going on. That bottom right hand panel. That's the pastor from Kingdom
You're right.
Come.
Yeah.
That's Seven's
Well,
comment.
that probably just means that you're looking at his artwork, and he tends to
Ross's
do
dad, huh?
certain things.
But Sheldon apparently shows up in Kingdom Come as well. So there's yeah. Well, it's the same actor. It's not necessarily the actual character, but
Well, I mean, does he have an eye patch?
Here, this is a great observation. When you have too much book and too much knowledge, what you end up doing is arguing with the writer's perspective in the book.
that is accurate.
Well, Kim, welcome to our show.
Yeah.
It's true.
But no, so but anyway, so like I said, I love that moment with Peter, and it's part of a larger conversation where the Marvels, the superheroes, that's what they're called. They call them the Marvels, and they're all being kind of blamed for all the things that are bad that happen, but never given credit for when they save the world. So we see the Thing there. He's looking all dejected because they just got through saving the world from Galactus and like total Armageddon. And then right afterwards, it's right back to business as usual. Superheroes are terrible. And from a fully meta perspective, this is because Stan Lee milked the melodrama. So he would always write the scenarios so that people were the most ungrateful.
Well, he would always play up that too,
Yeah.
like, the poor hero and the hated hero for the way they look and all that stuff, like the monster, Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But here we get to see that through the lens, again, a very deliberately constructed lens of this very average everyman, which is invaluable and a very literary and enriching experience. But it's kind of neat, partly because when you read those old Stan Lee era issues, you often, at least I don't know, I did, you have those moments where you're just screaming at Jameson and people like him who turn on a dime the minute their lives are saved and say, you're still a menace, and you just want to scream.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of a justification, because Sheldon doesn't yell at them. In fact, the panel where he's speaking is actually, he's whispering. That's the dialogue balloons are broken. It's meant to be he's muttering under his breath, but he's saying what we've all been thinking for years, which is, actually, I think he finally does yell. There's some people complaining on the street. Yeah, he finally does.
Yeah, he does.
Break for a moment.
A rummy. Yep, right there.
Do you need the world to actually end?
Yeah.
Stop complaining about these people who are saving us every day.
Once so, as you're touching on there, the whole series Marvels is not just topical now, but there's a lot of kind of, it's timeless in a way, because it echoes a lot of things that have happened in society, and is, of course, the art is reflecting that, but now it's also, there's a lot of things that are once again reflecting in it. It's really interesting.
Okay, I want to go ahead and share one thing. There's a little comment in the chat about Sheldon's character. So let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and share. This is from the epilogue. It's a picture of Alex Ross next to the model of Sheldon in costume. So, just to put that out there.
That's cool.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's almost like a cosplay cover before cosplay covers.
Yeah.
On that note, I want to bring up something as well. I'm going to share my screen here because I got to the epilogue and where'd it go?
Well, before we talk about the epilogue, because
okay.
I want to break down a little bit. We talked about how it kind of goes over the history of our universe from Sheldon's perspective, hang on a second. And it goes from the 40s, late 30s, the introduction of the Human Torch, Namor and Captain America, the war, all this kind of stuff going on here as we go through stuff. And one of the things that I thought was in all of the things, Sheldon's life story and correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, Twitless, but his life story is the only real individual perspective that we have, right? We've got this everything else is background and Sheldon's reaction to it, right? And so you have his thoughts about the saving and about the monsters and about the mutants and about human corruption and all this kind of stuff as it goes along. And
so
then,
the only exception to that is when he's talking to other people who are recounting things from memory, and occasionally it'll show kind of like what their memory was. So Sheldon was not there for that.
right.
So apart from that, no, it is no. You're right. It's Sheldon's. He's our point of view.
It's Sheldon's story, and we've talked about that about his limited perspective, the eye patch imagery, which is not something that I had thought of before. In fact, the funny thing is. About the way I had taken the eye patch is always as a symbol about the inexorable impact of the Marvels in a normal person's life, and also about the intimacy of Sheldon's place in it. Because if you guys don't know, he got a brick to the eye during the Namor torch fight back in 1940.
His first chance.
Yeesh. So that was one of those. Goodness sakes, pardon. So, but in issue 4, there is a shift in that. Sheldon gets progressively irritated with Sheldon gets progressively irritated at the daily person's ingratitude toward the Marvels who keep saving the day.
Right.
He gets just. And and everybody's hating on Spider-Man, and he's convinced that Spider-Man ain't such a bad guy, and Captain Stacy gets killed by a random gunshot. Well, it wasn't random, but anyway, the whole Sin Eater event is what that's about. And Sheldon decides he's going to prove that Spider-Man is innocent, so he goes to investigate, and he goes and interviews Captain Stacy's daughter, Gwen Stacy, who for some reason, man, she's dating that damn Parker, and he just can't stand Peter Parker. What kind of horrible taste does this chickadee have for dating that scab?
Again, that perspective is so rich. And this, by the way, what's also fascinating, I do want to highlight this, is right before he is meeting Stacy, the only character. One of the few, sorry, it's not the only, but one of the few times that Sheldon actually interacts with the Marvels. I think he has an interaction with Luke Cage where he actually talks to Luke Cage, I think, for a moment. But aside from that, he doesn't really talk to them. Their lives, he's always looking up at them. This is one of the rare moments where he actually has a conversation with one of them. It's he actually has he shares words with Otto Octavius.
But it is Octo out. Octo look a little dumb.
Right. And what's interesting is that most of the book we don't get conversations with the superheroes. He's even when he's looking at the superheroes, he's just taking pictures of them, often at a distance. And so finally there's a super character who's in prison. So he has a chance to go and try to talk to him, so he can try to clear Spider-Man's name all at the same time while hating Peter Parker, which is the most Spider-Man situation that's ever Spider-Man in the Spider-Man comics. So.
Well done. I wanted to say that it's interesting how, because at this point in time, we hadn't had the whole Spider-Gwen resurrection, all that stuff. And I think this is probably the first moment we've seen Gwen Stacy, other than reprints, in a comic in how many years, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's correct, because like there's been
Well, she was in Ultimate, but then she got killed again.
Yeah, she wasn't, but this was before. This
is
pre-Ultimate. This is 94.
Yeah.
When was Spider-Man Blue? Because that was later too, wasn't it?
Yeah, Spider-Man Blue was early 2000s. Jeff Loeb, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
go ahead. Well, I was going to say, that's something interesting about Ross's artwork then.
Unless you're Mexican.
It makes it look timeless, because this could literally be of any era. I would have assumed that this was written yesterday.
Well, yeah, what I was thinking here, and this is my observation and thoughts, is when I thought about that, her being in these comics for the first time in how many years, a couple of decades, she is the care that he takes with the way she's painted and illustrated. She's very
Effervescent.
Yes, thank you. She's very, beautiful, effervescent. Not like materialistically beautiful. She's beautiful, and it's like the comic nerds getting given this gift one more time. Kind of, it's a little bit of it's an interesting approach. It's a little take.
Well, and it's one of those too. Like, except for I was thinking also Gwen Stacy was in Spider-Man Saga, which wasn't technically a reprint. So there were people that were introduced to her character in the Saga was a little bit comics, a little bit just narrative, telling the big long story of Spider-Man. And so it was prose. It was a mashup of prose and comics, but it was mostly prose. So, so that was the one. It wasn't a reprint technically, but it was 4 extended volumes of. It was like a Wikipedia article of Spider-Man's history before Wikipedia by like 20 years.
So Neostar has a question in chat I do want to address because I'm being a nerd. Do we ever settle the whole Blob versus Juggernaut debate? And I know that's probably being a meme, but it's totally Juggernaut all the way. Crimson Gem of Cyttorak, and people have debated the power of power level of Cyttorak. There's a very famous thread on Comic Vine about it.
What if when Juggernaut rams Blob, the gem gets stuck in the Blob when Juggernaut tries to pull his body out of the Blob's stomach?
That's horrifying. I don't even want to think about that right now.
Yeah. The better argument that I always found, right, was...
Are we really having this conversation?
No. Completely different
apparently.
one.
I'm so sorry.
Which one has more dominion? The fact that Juggernaut technically has access to all of Cyttorak's full force, or when Doctor Strange evokes Cyttorak for the chains of Cyttorak to try to stop Juggernaut, which one overpowers the other?
I think the answer to that question is who's
writing
more. Well, true that, but who's lore wise, I would put it to whoever's got more favor with Cyttorak, like basically who's got the more favor essentially, and I think that would be more of like a who's
Well, I'm with that because I suppose Kane has the actual gem in him or whatever it is, and Strange is just kind of like invoking something that's more of a spell thing. So,
but it's all based on whether or not Cyttorak really likes you or not. If he's really pissed off at you, I don't think you're in. Yeah.
So, which has varied with Juggernaut several times too.
Sorry, you're right, Reese. We need to move on.
Drawing it back in. We'll have one of these days. We'll have a whole show dedicated to Juggernaut, and we'll call it, of course, Juggernaut Bitch. But until that time, we're gonna go ahead and get back to Gwen Stacy.
So Ross draws her very, very well.
I think it's definitely on.
And one of the things that is really interesting about the Gwen Stacy segment in the story is that Gwen Stacy, of course, has grown up in the world of the Marvels, but I think she is the only other character other civilian type character who simply accepts and appreciates the world of Marvels as much as Phil does.
That's what my next point was going to be.
Phil's daughters, I think, actually are right around.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think you're right, but I'm talking in I don't think that they do so much in the original story, and maybe that's much not me. I wasn't picking up on that. So
they are. They're super pure about it.
Yeah.
But they see it through a child's eyes, which is kind of the point,
right?
And the thing is that Gwen is also kind of seeing it through a child's eyes here. So there's that spirit that they're both kind of sharing, which is why he talks about their innocence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that superheroes protect the innocent, and that's where he's at this point in the story. He's really kind of it's where he falls on in terms of defending and being an apologist for superheroes. Is they defend the innocents.
Yeah,
which I think is what do you call it? That's
beautiful.
Beautiful. No, it's great. I think it's great. But my one, not one, but I guess one of my significant critiques of this chapter 4, right, is that because it drills in so much into Gwen and into this specific quest that Phil has and how he moves toward this. He moves outside of the realm of just an observer and into the realm of being an actor within this story. Right. And while I don't think that poses any sort of problem at this part of the story, it does later.
Really, because that's what I'm saying I want. I wish that I could actually, feel that he is really part of the story more and not just a journalist recalling.
No, the journalist is perfect because it's also because again on a meta level.
I'm saying I'm not saying the idea of him being a journalist is a problem. I'm saying the fact that the narration is what tells the story.
I get your
just feel like a journalist telling us.
Right, that's the part I like about it because on a certain level, this is not just a story about Phil. There is and it's not, and again, I personally is one mistake. I think that I think it is a mistaken interpretation to read Phil as Kurt. Phil is not Kurt.
Oh, that's Kurt. Okay, Kurt Busiek.
Because
I wasn't sure if you were saying Kurt the name or Kurt as in like short.
No, I'm not. I'm not addressing that point. Right. So the thing is that Kurt Busiek is not Phil, because Kurt Busiek has full knowledge of who Spider-Man is, and where Phil ends in the story is not where Kurt Busiek ends is in his career either. So it's very clear that Kurt Busiek is portraying a very particular type of person who has a history in a world like this, but it's also kind of on some level a history of people who have enjoyed these stories for years, which is also kind of what's going on in Kingdom Come, except it's doing this is Kingdom Come being done, I think, way better in a lot of ways.
I 100% agree with that.
Still,
it's kind of like the whole thing with Gwen Stacy, right? Like it's a whole harken back. It's like she's being presented nicely to us, for everybody as fans and everything like that. It's kind of like a love letter in a way.
It is interesting that you bring that up about him not being Kurt, though, because I'm going to share something here. I got to the end, and though I know, you clearly couldn't actually make the case that he is or anything. I'm going to wait till we get this up.
Well, let's wait for the epilogue, because I think Reese wants to have a little bit of a talk about.
Okay.
Right. So I want to. So by the end of this, of course, spoiler alert out there. Gwen Stacy dies, and so, yeah, I know everyone's favorite blonde.
Please just let her live.
Yeah. No, she had it coming.
There are so many characters.
She had it coming.
Oh my god,
it's so sad.
I figured out so many things laid open right there.
So anyway, Gwen Stacy dies, and he spent in the whole rest of the series. It's this broad brush. It's a pinpoint looking out to a wide lens, right? And it's a sweep of Marvel history, and Busiek narrows the scope of that to one girl and the reasons why the observation is this one girl. And then Phil realizes two things, that there's a tragedy in the death of Gwen Stacy, because Gwen Stacy is this, as he sees her, this pure soul. And that's one thing. And two, the only person that could have emotionally exonerated Spider-Man to the masses is Gwen Stacy. But he can't use Gwen in the story he wants to tell because she's dead, and that's tacky. So he's left defeated and wiped out emotionally. He witnesses this girl's death.
There's also the fact that her death gets pushed to page 10. Mm-hmm. The fact that because she's not a Marvel or a supervillain, the fact that her death is kind of glazed over, and that also
correspondence between everything.
Right, that bothers him, and it bothers him so much that he gives up and he moves out of the city. He can't take it anymore. They're off to the Cascades or whatever, right? And here's the part, like I finished reading this spring. I finished reading issue 4, and I was like, it just took the knees completely out of me because like the whole thing, we are going over stories that necessitate the death of thousands of people over this 20 years, right? And many of these are people that, because of the actually supervillains and aliens and Atlanteans and whatever else, that Phil would have known these people, right? You know, that these are faces he knew. They're not part of the story, but they're faces he knew. And yet Busiek lets us see one of the people that Phil knows. And Phil is so distraught after this one particular death that means so much more than all of the other hundreds that have to have been there, right? That's the one that makes him turn away from defending the Marvels, right? That it's hopeless. Give it to somebody else to do it, because there's no way that I can be part of that. And it's just like one of those. It was just like a gut punch of weakness to me. That's how. And I felt like it's just like, man, it's defeatist. That's the word I use to describe it. It's just the most defeatist take on a story ever. And I just couldn't, and I know, like, I'm you, Twitless, I know you don't feel that way about it. So tell me your interpretation of how wrong am I? Please tell me how wrong I am.
So I don't know if it's about being wrong, because I think that
I really want to be wrong.
He's so
let me finish. Because like I interpret this very differently.
Mm-hmm.
However, I mentioned at the very beginning that Busiek he wants us in this middle ground between comfort and discomfort. So that's where I'm at this ending. And so it's unsettled, it's an ambiguous kind of thing. It's a very literary kind of a thing. He's not going to just go, we go off into the sunset here. But I do not read this as a defeat. And that's why I'm going to highlight a couple of panels here.
Okay.
That I think are helpful.
I was just about to ask, how the hell do you get off on that? So please.
All right. So he says, come on, if I could zoom in here, because it's my Kindle's. Here we go. Okay. You can still see it, can't you? This documentary thing, you could make it. Me, I couldn't. Here, take it. You've got to be outside to see it for what it is. Outside what? Anything, everything, whatever. It's the only way to see it right. And again, vision is a very important thing here. A man without an eye. Go ahead, catch the moment, get it on the record. It's your job now. A defeatist would say, what's the point? What's the use? He would have not only, a true cynic doesn't just say, I'm done. The cynic says, there's no point, you shouldn't do it. So this is the sort of ambiguous part. Phil has had enough himself personally, and he admits that he's old and that he can't hack it in a sense. He can't, and he says part of the problem isn't the superheroes. The problem is that it never ends. The superheroes and their struggle for recognition, redemption, acceptance, it never ends. It never ever ends. And he's like, I can't do it anymore. This death did break me. So he does acknowledge a brokenness. So you're not wrong in that. Okay. But the brokenness leads to a torch passing. And he says, hey, and this is partly where this is where the story starts to become a little bit about the comic book industry and the next generation in a sense, because he says, hey, you bright young kid. And he's not being cynical about this. He does not salt the earth. In fact, he encourages her and he says, you can see what I can't. And because you can see what I can't, it is now your job. And that is a torch pass. And to me, a torch pass is not defeat. A torch pass is. Yeah. And at the very end, this is the part that I think is hilarious, because although he doesn't end with a riding off into the sunset, there's this hilarious moment, and he's like, you know what? This is not my game anymore. So let me hold this. Let me go find a good old American boy. Where does he say it? Here it is, right here.
Okay, I figured there had to be something I don't know here.
Normal ordinary.
He says,
Danny catches the second Ghost Rider.
Okay.
Well, the third.
I figured he had to be somebody. I just didn't know who.
So although he doesn't end with, he doesn't end with like a going off into the sunset, but he undermines his own defeatism, his own position of I'm out of this. Let me take a picture with a perfectly ordinary American boy.
Right.
Who's that American boy? A guy who's going to be a flaming skull for a head in a few years. So he's click, you know. So he ends it on a bit of subversive humor at his own point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's not too.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. There you go.
So
And Seven's got a great comment in the chat. Here, the cynic plucks out his other offensive eye.
Right.
Hey, listen to that.
Yeah. No, I think there might. I'm not 100% convinced I'm wrong, but I'm leaning. I'm heavily leaning that way.
Yeah, I like
So-
this, right? Because this is like it's his own superhero story in a way, right? And he's passing the torch at the end.
Well, the thing.
He smile. Look at him smile. Look at him smile at a literal superhero. Like it's presented ironically, but they're all laughing. They're all smiling at a literal Marvel superhero at the end.
And one of the things that if I was to have any issue with that at this point to continue, it is just off my head, because the other part I was saying I've been riffing on for a couple months that it's been in the back of my background noise in my brain. Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have background noise in their brain, or is that just me? Anyway, running along the background noise in my brain, and one of the things about it is just that, you know, you say he's passing the torch to somebody, right? But the dude's not dead, and he obviously, I mean, who else has his perspective, right? I mean, he's seen the whole thing. You can't just pass it off to some intern, right? I mean, that's part of that's the one thing. And obviously you can just pass it off to some intern. I mean, that happens literally all the time. I'm looking at you, Jim Davis. But yeah, I mean, that it's just if I was to make one complaint to Phil, that would be my argument. Or more argument than complaint. Yeah.
I think I'm with Barry on that.
I do. I think that is very much a you thing, Reese. But it's not it's not a wrong thing. I just think it's very much your point of view.
And it's like, yeah, and it's one of those things that, like, you know I don't always live up to that. There's times I gotta know about situations. Or there's times that.
Yeah,
but I'm weak. I just think I interpret it as a hey, it's his story up to this point, and he's not gonna just cry and burn like everyone said, salt the earth or cut out his other eye. I think it's just it's and there's enough comedy in there, and there's good stuff. Metal, what's your take on the whole thing?
A superhero, right?
Exactly.
He is a normal person who's been doing the best he can up to this point.
And that's
exactly.
If I can give credit,
that's one of my complaints with Marvel's. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have something you want to say first?
Yeah, I do. Let me validate. I want to validate Reese a little bit here by saying that the moment of defeat, that gut punch, is also supposed to happen too. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that it's not just gut punch and it's not just positive. What Busiek is uniting in this ending is he's uniting both emotions, the gut punch and the torch pass, and the positivity and the humor, and he's putting all of that into one ball, and he's handing that to you. And so if you feel mixed feelings about that, that is, in my opinion, that is exactly what Busiek wants out of this. He wants you to feel mixed. And I feel mixed about this, but that's why I think this ending is actually a better literary ending than the epilogue is.
Okay. Now, we'll get that. We'll get into that in a second. But what was it? I was something I was going to say.
Have we heard from Metal or Cartoonicus about this?
Oh,
I was just going to say, do you think this is also a metaphorical passing of the torch between artists and writers?
I think it alludes to that. But Busiek's career he did this like 25 years ago. This was like the
very beginning of his getting
mainstream. Pretty early.
Like Busiek started writing comics.
So maybe he was a kid.
Maybe he was a little bit of both. I mean, he's had good.
So Busiek started writing comics in the mid '80s, working for a bunch of indie comic companies.
He wrote Jello Man. So
right. And I'm trying to remember, like I'm not gonna remember. There's a bunch of small press in the indie revolution in the '80s, and he was writing a bunch of original creations and contracts and adaptations of British heroes and a whole bunch of stuff that he wrote. And by the time he was able to pitch Marvels, man, he was in to the inside. He was in like Flynn. So he was of those people who was like, going to Marvel and digging through the archives and talking to the old pros that were still around and interviewing people. And so like, in some ways, I think he is the kid, because he's reflecting back upon the legacy of these guys that he's gotten to know, through being, coming up out of the indies and now is swinging for the main team for the A team. So
I want to make an observation about this. So going back through it the second time, I really do think this is a love letter to all the comic fans. At the time that it came out, there were still some fans, most likely they were kids when they could remember the old Captain America and stuff like that. And then you have the Gwen Stacy moment. That was very big. That was a huge moment, especially in comics, especially for, young kids reading that stuff back in the day. And you have all these kind of homages, kind of tip of the hat in a lot of ways. And then you have the third party, which is Phil, going through it and, at his point of view, kind of carrying us through this whole thing. So that's kind of something I see there. It's just more of a tip of the hat at these moments and how great they were, and how there's this context, all the comics and everything that was going on at that time period.
I was just gonna say, if you want to see the story that is pure cynicism, the one that's a gut punch and nothing but the gut punch, it's Ruins by Warren Ellis, which is the version of Marvels where everybody dies.
Warren Ellis, you could have just said Warren Ellis, and I would have. Yeah,
but it's
as emo as it gets.
It's a 2-issue run, and it's nothing but all the characters, including Phil Sheldon, just getting murdered in horrible ways. It's the worst thing it's like one of the worst things I've ever read.
Why
it sounds like
think
Warren
there's
Ellis,
a market for that?
Well, here's the so do you remember when I said earlier that Warren Ellis? I said that there's certain creators, especially from the British invasion, who look down at what they're writing.
Mm-hmm.
Warren Ellis. Okay, so we've talked for a long time now about Kurt Busiek's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, Kurt Busiek's point of view. Look how many shots are bird's eye view. Kurt, and I think there's a certain point where Phil Sheldon says, "Hey, look up for once in your life."
Yes, I remember that.
So the whole point about Kurt Busiek is he looks up at the sky, and so he looks at superheroes by staring up at them, which is why Marvels and Astro City both have the tone, the very respectful, celebratory tone that they have. However, conversely, from what I have read of Warren Ellis, and I've read Planetary and Ruins and some other stuff, Warren Ellis looks down like a vivisectionist. He looks down at the operating table. He is killed. Whatever it is he's looking at is dead in his viewpoint. He's either killed it or it's dead by other means. And he is slicing it open saying, look, I can see the appendix. So what you're seeing
doesn't just leave it to comics. He did it to Castlevania too.
Right. So Warren Ellis is a creator who's looking down.
That's right.
At what he is looking at. And to me, that's the big difference between those types of viewpoints. And I vastly identify more with Kurt Busiek's point of view than I do with Warren Ellis's. Warren Ellis's point of view, I hate Planetary. It disgusts me. People were like, "Oh, someone recommended it to me," and someone I respect, and they said, "Oh, this is a celebration of superheroes." I was like, "No, it's not. It is a post-mortem of
like
someone."
A eulogy.
I don't sort of, yeah.
Well, but it wouldn't be a eulogy because that's the good talk.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's even worse than a eulogy.
It's a dislogy.
Yeah. Well, that's what most eulogies should be called now these days, because a lot of them I've seen that aren't praising the person who left.
But
man,
that's my perspective on this. And like I said, if you compare, and that's why I think I didn't just read Marvels, I read some of the other surrounding work. And so when you read Chuck Dixon's take and even Mike Barron's take, and then you read Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross's take, you can see how well that this team is accomplishing what they're accomplishing. And then you can see what Warren Ellis does and you go, oh, hell my gosh. Yeah. Kurt Busiek is, he's practically, the trumpet section for superheroes when you compare it to what those other guys are doing. So,
well, and one of the, again, now going back a little bit to my reaction to these first 4 chapters of Marvels, especially looking from this ending back as I was a week ago. Not a week. Well, yes, but one of the things that I don't necessarily appreciate about Marvels that I do more appreciate about Gotham Knights and about Chuck Dixon's Code of Honor, although those are very different in tone than this, and they definitely have a different reason in it. But one of the things that Busiek does in Marvels is he draws a clergy laity style line between normies and Marvels, right? And the in the first instance where he uses to blur that line, where one of the normies steps into the realm of the gods, right? He's instantly batted out and retires, and that's that's one of the things where I was just like, come on, man, because I find more appealing to the idea of the aspirational, not merely inspirational. And Marvel's is without a doubt an inspirational look at superheroes, but it is not what what I had thought in my first reading in my early 20s, and probably was largely colored through my perspective of superhero literature as a whole. It is not an aspirational work, unless you happen to be a writer or creator. I think that the subtext of the last chapter, if you are in the process of making comics, it's aspirational. But if you're in the process of living life, it is not. It is not. It's not. That message is not transferable outside of the form itself, and that's one of the things that I don't care for, is because the because I'm a raging Protestant, and I don't think that there's that class distinction is something that I fundamentally reject outside of.
If I may, part of that is, again, it's how Phil Sheldon sees it. But we know that Phil Sheldon is wrong, and we know for this very reason, because Phil Sheldon has multiple times been rubbing shoulders with one of those gods. And it's Peter Bloody Parker.
Yep.
And his interpretation of Peter Parker, as we know, he doesn't know it. And from at the story level, we don't know it. But anyone who knows Marvel Comics knows to interpret all of those scenes differently. We know that every time Peter Parker comes in there, what he's wrestling with, what he's dealing with, we know the issues sometimes of what he's actually dealing with at the time. And that's what gives us that additional perspective on the fact that Phil Sheldon's perspective, we know to some extent, is not the whole picture. Right. We're supposed to know that.
Is it interesting? I just noticed that, there's that contrast, right? Phil being wrong, but his thing is with Peter also, right? Even though we all know what Peter is, and that's something that Phil doesn't know. But the one thing that connects them is Gwen, and Phil sees her as something special also, or comes to, and then he's also trying to save her. And the guy that he was hating on the most, the guy that that he's rubbing shoulders with, the only super or the only Marvel he actually rubs shoulders with, is Peter, and that's also the guy that's the most important thing to him. And Phil hates him. There's a lot of different contrasts going back and forth in that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Very interesting to me.
You're making valid points, and I'm appreciating it. I'm digging it.
I know. I'm not sure if I'm going anywhere with that. It's just really interesting.
What you're saying, Barry, is really, really reinforcing the solid arguments and everything that Twitless is making and arguing with me. And I like it.
Well, I'm not necessarily. I agree. I get where your take is. I just I don't see it that way. I can.
Yeah. But we need to adjust, especially now. Let's dig into the epilogue.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the epilogue. I'm sorry I cut you off, but there's a panel that it's freaking, because I'm a big Superman fan, but it's Christopher Reeve.
Yeah.
And it's not Margot. It's the actual either the actress from the old TV show or the. Like I said, like he copied the Peter Parker from the 70s show. I think it's a copy of the actual Lois Lane from the old cartoon. and then using.
I definitely saw Superman there, and I think he's.
They're on the. It's right there. Which page is that?
I can pull it up in a second. So here's the interesting flip. I actually like the epilogue. It's wonderful. I like it as a standalone unit, and because and part of it, like the modern rendering that they can bring to the artwork makes Ross's work look even better in some ways. However, the actual story as a ending to Marvel's, I actually think is less.
Marvel's.
I think it's less than what Marvel's is. I think it's actually it's the type of situation where as a lit major, I hit the end of a book, a literary book, and I go, okay, this is the ending that my soul wants, but I know from artistic merit this ending was
right.
better.
I get what you're saying. They do that a lot.
Dude,
There's a lot of that lately.
With the end of Stranger Things season 1, and why I don't want to watch anything after the end of Stranger Things season 1.
Yeah,
there's a lot of that
seen
these days, isn't there? They're solid, but anyway.
Yeah. Anyhow, so let's go a little bit talking.
I love these images.
I'm gonna
right there.
That's clearly Chris. That's clearly Reeve.
No,
there's
clearly Reeve, and that I really believe that's he probably used a model or whatever, but I think that's.
Are you sure that's not Linda? Are you sure that's not Linda Carter? Or I don't know. I could be wrong.
It could be, but I believe it's supposed to be. It could be.
Well, where?
I don't think it's Linda Carter because Linda Carter's eyes are a little bit different, a little bigger than hers.
On the far right, there's clearly Superman.
So you see
Sheldon
Superman
is looking
right there in the lighting and blue.
With the glasses.
Yep.
So does this count as a crossover?
It's more of an Easter. It's more of an Easter egg. Ross likes to do this because he's using photo reference so often that some of the characters are definitely based on. I think he did this in Kingdom Come. The guy he based Captain Marvel on wasn't that a Hollywood actor? I forget his name.
It was wasn't that Reeves, George Reeves? No, it was the guy who played Tarzan.
Anyhow, so the story in the epilogue is 2 years later, right? 2-3 years later, whatever it is. And Phil has brought his now teenage or college age daughters. They're up and around that period.
I think they're teens because he mentioned.
Yeah. They could be, they're like late teens though.
Yeah.
Because they're early teens before that. Because they were talking about having crushes on heroes and they're doing all the junior high girl things. So they're late teens in this story. And like I said, that Phil actually mentions in the dialogue, they're not going to be around. They're not going to be, young forever. They're getting ready because they're on the cusp of going out into the world to do the thing, right? So he brings them down to Rockefeller Center, and it's actually a scene from an old X-Men comic, with the all new, all different X-Men, X-Men
Super
giant size X-Men. That's what it was. And they go through the scene and they're witnesses to the thingamy, right? And Phil is there and he's kind of recovered from his shock. He's been out in the world and he's talks about being his interest in the Marvels and this world has been rekindled, but he doesn't know, what that's all like, where it all is going to fit in, and he's sorting it out or whatever. And then his daughters, they're in the middle of it and they're fascinated by the heroics going on. The X-Men pop up out of the woodwork, and one thing I want to point out, if you go to page, they're not numbered here, but where Storm like transform, or she throws off her coat. She's wearing the Storm costume. Now,
page 4.
I do not know how I never saw this before. Totally off subject of the story itself, but this Storm costume, right, with the big grommet between the bra and the panties, like there is no way that wouldn't just ride up uncomfortably all the time.
Well, I mean, this is an entirely different conversation about superheroes.
I can't.
Welcome to something that you tend to notice when you see Alex Ross art.
Yeah.
When Byrne and is it Cockrum do this? It's like you're not going to see it the same way. If Alex Ross does it, you're going to notice.
All of a sudden, it's like, man, I'm uncomfortable, and I'm wearing like cargo shorts.
That's an Alex Ross thing, and it is why his artwork is simultaneously beautiful and a little unsettling.
So
it's just yeah.
So again, imagine if this was using some kind of more appropriate 70s style artwork.
No, I like that he's the one. I think it.
And plus, this is how my brain always thinks about those costumes anyway, even when we're looking at older art. Like,
I know.
that is how I interpret it.
Yeah.
I'm always like, man, that's going to write up pretty hard.
So, but anyway.
7.
So anyway, point being, Phil witnesses his daughters and their like amazement at everything going on, and Nova shows up to finish the job after the X-Men have flown off chasing and fighting the Sentinel robots, and then that's kind of where the story ends, right?
The best moment right here, I do want to point it out, is the girls look at her and they say, is this what your life was like? Is this wonder essentially that we're experiencing right now?
Relation.
And then we have this wonderful double page spread of him thinking about his entire history. And then he gets a little bit of the magic back.
Yeah.
And
pride and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So looking at this,
so this is what. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is what I was going to say earlier. We're looking at this shot, and it's interesting because Twidless talked about it, him not being Kurt, and then you were talking about him, getting close to the superheroes but never being able to get in. When I looked at this, and again, I know you couldn't, but I couldn't help seeing an older gray-haired gentleman with big, thick-rimmed glasses and a mustache, and thinking about the idea of Stan Lee or someone, having lived through this and then going on to write about it in the comics.
So what's interesting is by the time Busiek writes this epilogue, he actually is closer to Phil in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in age especially.
In age and in career. Mm-hmm. So the comparison to Phil actually gains a little bit more legitimacy at this point. Right. But it's funny that you mentioned Stan Lee, because Stan Lee wrote the foreword to Marvels. Yeah. And I actually disagree with Stan a bit. And it's one of my big disagreements with Stan regarding his perspective on his career. People talk about this all the time, that Stan Lee kept trying. He didn't want to be in comics. He wanted to write the great American novel, and that he saw the great irony here.
I've never heard that.
It's pretty common knowledge. And it's also fairly common that many of the great comic book people that get looked down with reverence also looked down a little bit, at least, on the superheroes that they created. Steve Ditko is a known person who did this. So like some of these creators they just saw it as a job, and they're like, yeah, I'm just writing whatever crappy cartoons until I can get something better. So the point here is the fact that Stan Lee looks at Marvels and says, superhero comics can finally be considered literary because of Marvels. And I'm like, Stan, you fool. Because it's like, it's kind of sad in a sense that Stan still had that sort of inadequacy after so long, that it takes, in his opinion, Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek to be like, finally give that sort of literary polish. And on the one hand, I agree that this is a very literary work, but I also look at some of the great stories that Marvel has produced for decades and gone, this is great too. It may be great in a different way, but that's my...
I have a real hard time believing that is actually how Stan feels, because you see it in his writing. He is a total nerd. And he geeks out about
of nerds that
his
would
stuff.
love to be literary authors. That
too. He would have been a terrible literary author because he never does his research. He goes straight for whatever he thinks is cool. And he said that himself, right? He's like, I wouldn't know a gamma ray if it snuck up and bit me in the behind. But if it sounds cool, I'll use it.
Okay,
Right.
so
Playing
Stan
to
is
his
a
audience, though.
Stan is a very complicated person, and there are things. That's another conversation, but
Oh
But my
yes.
point is, sometimes I wonder if he is being expected to do the advertisement for Marvel, and he has to say what they want him to say.
there's a bit of that too.
And this could very well be an example of that. Was that really his line, or was that the product placement?
No,
And it's also the fact that, like, it won all of these literary awards, so obviously it's literature, right? Nobody
That's
was handing Stan, a prize for the first appearance of the Hulk, right? Even though the first appearance of the Hulk is cheesy and complex, right?
Sure.
So,
Sure.
it's not just some flimsy junior high joke, right?
But they all saw comics as disposable trash. That's what
Yeah.
that's why they
Well, that was
that's
a society, right?
yeah.
And that's
well,
why
yeah,
In
they-
many ways, a lot of these pages would make actual like literary authors jealous, right? Because you've still got the type of dialogue and the type of pacing and movement that you might read in a novel, but some of these shots are so beautiful that you wish you could use a whole page describing them before the action even started, and you don't have to, right? Like it's just right there in your face right away. It's almost like post-literary in some ways.
Yeah. And that's actually, we've talked about that a lot. The very language of comics, that it actually speaks a language all its own, and I think that's a factor in it too. But anyway, moving on to Twitless, I want to hear why you don't like the ending, and then I can talk about why I do like the ending of the epilogue.
right. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is gonna sound weird. I
Okay.
don't like the ending because I like it too much.
Is it 'cause
Okay.
it's a good ending? It's like that. It's that
So
nice ending. It's too.
So when I mentioned earlier about the fact that the ending to chapter 4 is this complex ball of emotions.
Mhm.
And because it's such a complex ball of emotions that's weighing tragedy, defeat, and also positivity, humor, and passing the torch at the same time, that level of complexity is to me chef's kiss for what he's going for.
Okay.
Because so much of Marvel's is about showing both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
Here's all the positive, beautiful things. Here's all the negative, even bigoted things going on behind this. Here's when I picked up a brick and threw it at Iceman's head.
Yeah.
And then here's also when I saved a mutant's life. Like both of those things are happening. And so just like any human being is a complex mixture of the good that they do and the bad that they do. The ending of Marvel's is supposed to leave you with that, complicated, slightly unsettling mixture. And
Neutral.
Well, and he does sum that up though in this one panel.
I feel like this.
You don't like that your dessert was a palate cleanser.
That's what it is. I get
Because
what
that's the
you're saying,
purpose
though.
of an
I agree.
epilogue, is to be a palate cleanser.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's clear to me that what's going on here is that this is the final commentary on superhero comic books in general. He's saying, look back at the years.
Yeah.
It's complicated, but it's also fun.
Look at where we're at.
And we have memories. We have
And that's fair.
nostalgia.
I'm not upset. I'm not like, oh, I hate this ending, but I'm like, I look at the other one, I'm like, I think the other one's a better ending. So that's
Well,
I
you
completely
think-
know what you're saying.
I
but
wonder.
wait.
I wonder if it's an epilogue because somebody else, like an editor, felt the same way and said, I don't like that. I think it's better if it ends here. And somebody fought him and said, okay, fine. I'll let you put it in after the story.
Well, it was done like 20 years later. So I mean, it was,
there you go.
Well,
Yeah.
this happened in there's a rich history of this type of thing. Barry, what were you saying about it?
Well, no, I completely agree with you on the Marvels and like the ending. To me, it's like here's your neutral ending, but it's up to the reader to determine really how they feel about it.
Mhm.
And this, like Metal said, the epilogue is completely the sorbet. It is definitely it's a nice little piece to cleanse, and then like Cartoonicus said, it's a great reflection. It's a great even that scene. So I agree with everybody. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Because Twitless knows this, obviously, right? Because you're a lit major, that the whole purpose of an epilogue historically is kind of to serve as a palate cleanser, right? The actual story ends here. You can choose to leave it here because this is where the story is supposed to end. But if you need more, we are continuing past this point. This is post-story at this point.
So what they should have done then is like a video game, have the good ending, the bad ending, and the neutral ending.
Choose your adventure at the end of the damn thing.
And the good ending. No, okay. So my take, what I loved about it was I really felt, I still kind of feel that Phil, like, at the end of 4, and like 4 is such a drastic departure from the rest of the thing. It stops being a broad sweep. It stops being about the flow of the universe. It stops being. It instead focuses on a single tragedy that overshadows everything else that has gone on. Right. And Phil throws his hands up, and the only reason he passed the torch is because somebody said, you can't just leave. This is awesome. And fine, you do it. You do it. I've lost it. It doesn't even matter anymore. I got to get out of here. We find a normal kid. Screw it. I'm gone. Right. and yeah. Okay. And we get the and you point out the metatextual stuff, and you're not wrong about that. But the thing about the epilogue is Phil's trying to find his way back, and he's not sure he can, but there's in his absence, he's hungry for something. And he finds it because his kids, they've got the fire, right? They've got the fire, and he can see it in their eyes, and so he gets it because his kids get it, and they've grown up surrounded by this stuff. It's infused in them, and maybe this is part of because comics were my thing, and now they're my son's thing. You know what I'm saying? And so I
you identify with it. No, that's fair.
And that's what. And maybe that's part of why it hit me so much. But a big part of it is like, but it's passing it on that makes it real, right? And that's what gives it the thing. So Phil's whole thing when he was passing it on to the other gal, it felt like it was like, fine, get this the hell away from me. If you stop talking to me about keeping on, just take my papers and leave. And this time it's like, no, he sees the value of it because he sees the value within the people that he cares about, within their eyes. And so it through processing the loss of another person's daughter, right? Then he sees his own daughters and their boldness and their wonder and their bravery in that moment. And it bookends everything. And that's part of my thing.
No, I totally see that. I don't even.
And
wow, that really hits home too.
I have a take on it though.
When you consider that last joke about letting them watch, something could have happened to them.
Yeah.
And it would have been Gwen Stacy all over again.
But it didn't, because here's the thing. I didn't want to argue with Reese's point, but I am going to argue a little with Reese's point they raised earlier, because you said that clearly people have been dying this whole time. Not according to Phil. Phil doesn't the most when he lists every one of those moments of carnage, including the flooding of New York.
Right.
A panel later, he says everything was fine.
Yeah.
And part of that is on a meta level. Is that was the golden age of comics, golden age, and then leading into the silver age of comics, right? Where like you could have a flood of New York, and then 2 panels later, everyone's fine.
Yep.
Because that was how things were back then. It was when the Bronze Age hit that it was like, no, actually, people are going to die. Yep. There are consequences to these superhero actions. So Phil's experience partly patterns and maps onto the ages of comics in that sense. Like no one had really died in comics until Gwen Stacy, which is why it was such a huge event. It's not entirely accurate. Some characters had died, but Gwen Stacy was seen as like in many people's minds as being the first time someone died.
But she was important. Like she was important to the readers because she was important to Peter, and that's why it was felt so heavy.
Yeah,
it was actually felt by the fans, and that's why I was saying, like, it's almost an homage as it was going through, because there's all these keys in it, and it
usually
mirrors.
Main characters don't die.
Yeah. And Gwen.
Well, and the other thing in further defense of the epilogue too, is Phil's realization of the worthiness of it all through the eyes of his daughters. Like I said, that reflects back on into chapter 4, right, and it reinforces, the truth of what he was grasping for in issue 4, right? Or in well, it is issue 4, but and so it, like I said, his understanding is opened through the eyes of his daughters in a way that preserves that wonder. So that's part of it. So but there you go.
I think I definitely get what you're saying with that, and I agree to both. So I can step back and see both endings. They're cool. With me, I definitely think that the original one was handled just fine, and because it gives you that chance, and I think it did exactly what Bert Busick wanted it to do, and Phil is illustrated as being and written as being upset, and he's in his feelings right there, and which is fine. Like, it's not supposed to be a perfect ending.
Well,
and then
I think
a little bit.
I think that's also enforced because it's an epilogue, not a chapter 5.
That's what I was going to say. I think it's fine because it's not added in as quote unquote the final chapter. Epilogue means in addition to the story, so you can choose not to have your dessert. If you want.
Yeah, right, exactly. this was definitely
no. Take that trash away from me.
This was definitely a Christmas cookie. It's literally it's happening at Christmas.
So this is they added the epilogue for all the people that, like me that didn't understand. So yeah.
I here's the thing. I like this ending. It's great. It's just there's a part of me that goes from a literary perspective. I think the original ending, it has more literary weight to it, and so I have to kind of go with like, okay, well, I think this one's has.
Well, and I think part of that I think part of that has to come to like, doesn't have to. I think there is a temptation, and I think you can make a really maybe the truth of the matter is that Marvel does not fit into this, but there is a real temptation to think that the sad ending, and I'm not saying you're doing this, by the way. I just see a lot of writers do this, that the sad ending or the shocking ending is the better ending.
Sure.
Right. I'm not saying that's really that Marvel's is going for that. But it does seem, I mean, I just feel issue 4 is disjointed from the other.
So if I could, like, my issue,
sad though.
My issue is that a lot of the people we've talked about who look down at what they're writing often like to give a either sad ending or an ending that's only gut punch. I feel like the ending of Watchmen, for example, is just pure gut punch, even though he's trying to be positive, sort of. It's such a gut punch. I can't even interpret any of the positivity. But in Marvel's, I had this perfect amount of this perfect discomfort with it. I had both sides of the coin. I had the positive, and the artwork does a lot to sell this, by the way. The bright, even the ending that still has some sadness to it, there's still such bright colors. And so Kurt is still leaning into the visual metaphor, I think, of positivity in a lot of ways. And so despite what Phil is feeling. So to me, because I agree with you. One of the things that drew me and continues to draw me towards superhero comics is the fact that it is a part of literature that does not have to have sad endings in order to be significant. I got tired of reading every piece of great literature and be like, oh, who dies this time? And not even just who dies, but who ends up miserable. I hate the tragicomedy where it's just like the character just ends up just depressed, alone, and sad. Oh, it's literary. Everybody's sad. I hate that. There's so much to
that conversation right there, man. That's like another 2 hours for me to get into.
Well, yeah, I mean, like,
I don't have the time.
Right? No, even Lord of the Rings is one of those that, like, that not everybody has a happy ending. But
there's reasons, right? And
absolutely. But
from our human perspective.
But in my opinion, what Marvel's is doing is Marvel's is giving us a complex one. So Kurt is not just being like, oh, I'm just going to give you the sad ending. He's like, I'm going to give you both sides of this. And that's what I love about it, because I feel like I have
a melancholic overcast with some of the sun still shining through.
Yes,
it's like
that's Astro City.
Yeah,
that's Astro City all the way. And to me, it's in my opinion, it is my favorite literary approach to superheroes that I have currently seen, because when I see other people, Alan Moore, for example,
find balance.
I feel like Alan Moore tends to not do it as well. I think Grant Morrison doesn't do it as well.
Oh, okay. Let's not talk about Morrison.
But I'm just saying that, like, I agree with you, Reese.
So Barry's got a real soft spot about Morrison after New X-Men. So just don't.
Okay.
Don't say it.
I'm just saying that, like, I agree with you that I'm not just. There is a trend to. I agree. There's a trend to see the literary equals sad, and I agree with you that that's a problem. I don't think that's what Kurt is doing here.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I completely 100. I would call it out if I think that's what it was.
Here's what I want to add to that, because I feel somewhat differently. I generally do not appreciate bittersweet. I would rather you be hot or cold, but not lukewarm. Right? But I think there's a different way that you can translate the ending, and that is basically sad, but ... Right, and we see this sometimes. One that actually an example I can come up with, though I haven't seen the movie. From what I understand, and I saw some of the clips and stuff, the Batman movie, right? Batman literally.
Oh my God, that's a steaming pile. We can't even talk.
Maybe
about
it is. But,
my feelings about that movie are so strong, I cannot articulate them in a civil fashion.
It has the most unexpected ending for me. Because
it's not. It's the most. Okay, I'm just not going to talk. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to interrupt you.
I think Artigas is making a different point. So let's try to focus on that.
I'm not going to say nothing.
I was surprised they had the guts to do this. That Batman literally fails. Right, the city gets flooded. He doesn't save anybody, except right after failing, he finds himself having to rescue the kids, and a character breakthrough comes into play because he tried to, get everybody into line by scaring them. And all it did was push them away. And he learns in this moment that he can change things by instead giving them someone to believe in, right? And so, though the overall plot is ultimately a failure, there's this bonus material that comes as a result of it, right? And that I can see, right? It's like you're saying, the kind of the light shining through the clouds. The clouds are still there, but then we realize that's not actually the end. We're going to do this other thing that says, okay, moving forward, we've learned a great deal from this, and the future can be bright. And that's what I see when he's giving up, but at the same time, they're literally showing this future superhero, right?
Well, it's a human moment to me, and that's actually why I like the Batman for that.
I don't really.
There are other parts of Batman I liked, especially photography.
Right. I almost wanted to full screen Reese there to look at his facial expression and saying everything.
Right. We need to ignore the Batman. Okay, let's just focus on the point about.
I don't feel like I don't know.
I agree with this point.
I will grant your perspective in relationship to this story and leave it at that.
Let's do that. That's another show, and we need to wrap up.
I understand your point.
Maybe I chose the wrong illustration there. But there are stories that can do this, right? They actually kind of have a failure, but then that failure ends up leading to a very unexpected element.
Yeah.
And you realize, that was actually what this was about the whole time.
Yeah.
So we're at 2 hours. I think we should do concluding thoughts.
Yeah, I think so. So everybody who had read it before, do you think Marvel's holds up?
Yes. Super yes.
I think it's better in life because I can look back now knowing a lot more of the history of comics and the moments and the beats that it takes. To me, I really believe it was a lot of just tipping of the hat and a lot of different love letter moments to comics in a way.
Yeah. Marvel's is a feat, right? It's something that has been done in terms of creating a Mitchnerian scope of comic book history, of a comic book universe, and it makes it relatable and enjoyable. And I think it's good. And you all have convinced me that I was in my concept of the fetism, that the work as a whole is not the featist. So congratulations, you have one. No, I liked it, and I agree with what something Jim Tooner said earlier. Maybe not entirely to his extent, but he was saying that Alex Ross, the only superhero book where Alex Ross's art is the perfect fit for it, is Marvel's. I would have to agree. Oh, soft agree on that.
It might very. I'm not positive on it, but it might very well be.
I agree with the point of it because it masterfully matches him, right?
Yeah,
those moments.
Did that one
because Ross is an amazing artist in his own. Yeah.
He and I think it's Paul Dini did the tabloid size Batman and Superman books, and the Batman one particularly I think holds up pretty well for the nature of that story. But anyway,
I think it's yeah.
I can say to somebody whose first experience reading it is basically us talking about it right here. I'm familiar with it. I mean, it's hard to have been in comics at any point in time and not being familiar with it. I've seen panels before,
I certainly was.
and I would say it holds up to expectation.
Nice.
You know, like what I expected it to be going into this. So that's good.
Me, I've actually developed a new appreciation for it since the beginning of the stream. And again, you know, as we said, a lot of that is going to be because I had to rush through it. And there was going to be things I didn't pick up. And I do now, you know, particularly since the Gwen Stacy story, I think, it did manage to gain more of that human side and an actual, you know, story that I couldn't get invested in that I was looking for before. That being said, if I had not been having to rush through it for time and had to slog through everything from the beginning to get there, I don't think I would have made it.
I know what you're saying. I agree with you. Actually, going back, I was thinking after the first few pages, I was like, this was better than I remember. Or it was better. I was remembering it better than what this is. It felt like, and then it picks up.
Artists. I don't understand.
Oh, dude, I was gonna say, starting like, dude, this isn't wordy at all.
This is a fast. I was gonna say this is a fast read. I read this in a couple hours. It's brisk.
You guys need to. I did read it in a few hours.
The first page of JoJo's takes longer to read than that.
Oh,
you guys.
I think that's probably.
I
think when you look at JoJo's, I think you're right. But once again, that's in JoJo's, at least in the translations. I don't know how it reads in Japanese. JoJo's and Marvel's, both they're using the patois of a specific form of language to give texture to the story.
You guys need to read From Hell. That's all I'm going to say.
No, I do not. I don't ever want to touch that.
You guys need to read From Hell. If you want a work that takes you a long time to read, give me a break. Like, oh my gosh, there's so many words on the page.
Okay.
I don't want to read anything.
It wasn't the words. I think it was just
the moment.
On the subject of Alan Moore, guys, listen. I last week I read Saga of the Swamp Thing, the first 6 issues. That's pretty good stuff.
That was way different.
Honestly,
though. Like that was a different more.
That was. But I mean, like this is the thing. Like that story. I enjoyed that so much. It might have bumped, whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow off my top Alan Moore list.
Really.
Yeah. I really like Saga of the Swamp Thing.
I really believe that
those first 6 issues anyway. It's 2 story arcs that are in there.
I've heard people rave about his Swamp Thing.
Yeah, I think it might be worth doing a show on at some point. I really especially because
I've liked it.
I love
especially because of how like janky some of his later stuff is. Some of it's really good, but some of it's a little janky.
think it's more at his strongest.
I think it's up there. I think it's worth looking at.
Wow. My top Alan Moore is top 10, so we'll have to
top 10 pretty.
And I've not read top 10, so
I do love me some top 10.
Yeah, but top 10 is the closest. Top 10 for me is the closest Moore comes to being.
I was gonna say,
how old is the top 10 now? It feels like it's what? Oh
gosh.
Yeah, well, it was after he left Extreme Studios, wasn't it? Anyway,
it was 99.
There you go.
Okay, so I was way off.
Gosh, that's like
that whole period
over 20 years
together for me though for everything.
Oh yeah. So next week's show, tentatively, ladies and gents, and I don't know if anyone's still watching or not, but
no, Seven says that Alan Moore and Alex Ross should do a blankets retrospective.
That's the most perfect comment ever.
That keeps coming up here.
Blankets. Well, actually, I'm going to mention that in a second. Tentatively, next week we are going to be doing a discussion on memoir as a genre, and I'm hoping
Didn't
that
we already
Matt
do
Cro-
that with Mouse?
No, I'm hoping that Matt Krotz and Number One Marmaduke fan will be able to come for that one because they both have had interesting things to say about memoir, and I want to dig deep on it. So I'm not sure.
I thought I was done with blankets. I talked like 3 hours about
Yeah,
blankets.
we won't necessarily bring up blankets specifically, but we're talking about the genre of memoir. That's tentatively next week, and then I think I know what next week's going to be, but I'm not going to tell people until I have guests nailed down. I have to confirm that like in the next couple of days. So it's a secret, everybody.
Ooh, sounds good.
I'm terrible. I'm the worst host in the world. Thank you for watching.
Disagree. You're doing great.
Anyway, that's today. This show. Pay attention. At some point, we'll be getting new Forces pages. I'm excited about that. I will tell you, everybody, it is the end of the fiscal year for us. So I am burning some midnight oil to get all my stuff ready for that. So I'm not sure how quick things are going to be up on the uptake with some of that stuff, but at least I'm done with school.
Congrats.
Yeah. So anybody else want to talk about stuff before we call it a night?
Sure, babe.
I feel like we said everything.
I think we did.
I was going to yell at people to buy the physical copy of X Dynam's Chaos Episode 4, just because I like money, and it'd be nice to have a physical copy in your hands.
Yeah, and that's available
Tangible.
on Indie Planet.
Yes, Indie Planet put the link in the chat.
Excellent. There we go.
Check out Omega Girl and Indie Planet as well. I will put a link because
Mega Bubba.
I have a publisher link that I can post. One second.
Ideal Comics digitals are available for sale on Gumroad if you want to give us money, or you can sign up for our Patreon, which goes to give you the quality content that you receive here on the. Actually, it goes into a pot of money that we'll hopefully use for other projects down the road. So, who knows where that happens there.
Okay.
But you get some sneak peeks of Forces pages, so that's something.
Do you guys have? Do I follow you guys on Instagram? I know I do. I do. You Metal. I've seen you more on there lately.
Oh yeah, I saw your Chocobo piece. That was pretty good.
Yeah, thanks, bro.
I'm not on it. I'm on Twitter. That's my.
Damn you! I've actually recently deleted my account, so I'm gonna get back on there.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually.
As soon as I don't have another rage at Twitter.
Earlier, and I'm like, where is it? I thought I followed him at one point in time.
Yeah.
Right,
actually, I wasn't raging. I was just off Twitter because I was just spending too much time on it.
That's fair. Well, that's a show for everybody.
All right.
I'm gonna put up my YouTube channel here.
Oh, yep, you do so.
Yeah.
Also, check out Super Schooled.
Super Schooled. I love.
Yes, because the last strip Twitless wrote actually had some awesome dialogue.
Okay.
Right on.
It's so brilliant. I already forgot what I wrote.
That's because the universe reset again.
Yeah, there we go. That's the reason.
That's
Was
me
that
the
it?
whole way. That's me.
You guys are going full hog on
Talking
me.
in.
Okay,
Right.
we're going to call it there. And until next time, get out there and read some comics. Come on. What else are you doing with your life? You're washing your feet. You're clipping your toenails.
Comics
Take a
are
break and read some
visual art.
comics. Bye.
Bye.